Winning millions by playing the lottery has gotta be the best thing ever, right? Just imagine all that freedom and fun that money would bring into your life. Suddenly, you'll be able to do anything you want. Well, unless someone stops you. Sometimes, the price of that money is just a little too high, as these lottery winners found out. They knew their life was about to change when they hit the jackpot, but they didn't know exactly how. They probably thought everything was about to get a lot better, but they were wrong. Want to know what happened to these tragic winners? Then stick with us. The first winner I'm going to introduce to you is Ibi Roncaioli. Ibi was born in Hungary but moved to Canada, where she met her husband, the respected doctor Joseph Roncaioli. Before Ibi got her big win, she was married to Joseph for 30 years. They had a child together and lived as a family in Vaughan, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto. They all seemed very happy. Because Joseph's gynecology practice was so successful, the family was living comfortably on a salary of $20,000 a month. But that didn't match the huge payout Ibi was going to get. It was 1991, and Ibi and her friend, Ludmila, decided to buy a lottery ticket together. They were just having a bit of fun. They had no idea they were about to win big. But the Canada 649 game was their lucky charm. The jackpot was a whopping $10 million. Because they played it together, Ibi and Ludmila split their winnings evenly. Ibi went home with $5 million in her bank account. That should have been a day for celebration, but instead, that's the moment that problems started. Even though her husband had been happy to share his salary with her for the past 30 years, Ibi wasn't so quick to share her lottery winnings with him. She stashed it away in her own account and refused to share most of her millions. Worse, she wasn't even telling Joseph what she was spending it on. But it turned out there was a good reason she didn't want to explain herself. The money was actually going to her children. Why wouldn't she just tell him that? Well, it's simple. One of the children was the one she had with her husband. More money was going to a second child she had before she married Joseph. But that wasn't the problem. There was actually a third child Joseph had never heard of. She'd been keeping this child a secret for 30 years and suddenly handed over $2 million to it. That must have hurt Joseph, especially because he accepted Ibi's other child that wasn't his. Why keep the other one a secret? We'll never know, because in July 2003, Ibi was found dead on the sofa in the mansion she shared with her husband. Authorities thought she had simply died from natural causes, until her body was sent for an autopsy that revealed something pretty scary. They were shocked when they got the results of her blood test back. It definitely wasn't natural causes that killed Ibi. It was a combination of painkillers and alcohol, administered in a lethal dose. Soon, the coroners discovered suspicious needle marks on her legs and feet. Ibi didn't have access to needles. But, of course, there was someone close to her that did. Her doctor husband. Police started trying to piece together the story. Apparently, Joseph had been seen drinking and acting strangely the day that Ibi died. They started to get suspicious of him and looked into his movements more closely. They managed to prove that he took the cocktail of drugs that he injected into Ibi from work. He then carried them all the way home before injecting them into his wife and killing her. It was 6 months after Ibi's death that Joseph finally admitted he injected her with the drugs. Police had confronted him with evidence, and he couldn't avoid confessing. They finally heard the story of what happened that evening. Joseph claimed that Ibi had been suffering from sudden weight loss and a lack of energy, which couldn't be explained. He said she was afraid of doctors, so he was trying to help by treating her himself. But after Ibi died from the overdose that had been given to her, Joseph didn't even call an ambulance. In fact, he made no attempt to help her. Instead, he called his bookkeeper and then the estate agent who had been showing them around homes they were thinking of buying. It was Joseph's bookkeeper who eventually called an ambulance, but by then, it was too late to save Ibi. By now, police felt that they had more questions than answers. Did this happily married man really kill his wife because she'd given money to a secret kid? How could a doctor with a spotless record accidentally give someone a lethal dose of drugs? And why call your estate agent after murdering your wife? Well, it turned out the call to the estate agent was significant. Now, the life of Ibi and Joseph began to unravel in front of them. They'd been talking to the estate agent about buying a new house, but it wasn't the kind of house purchase you'd expect from a new lottery winner. Instead of moving into a giant mansion, Ibi and Joseph were trying to move out of the mansion and into a smaller house. That sounds insane, But even with the lottery win and Joseph's impressive salary, E.B. had somehow blown through the couple's cash. In total, their net worth was about $300,000, but she had no interest in using her winnings to pay Joseph back. But how did she spend all that cash? We know she sent her lottery winnings to her kids, but Joseph's salary was big enough that she should have had loads of money. Well, it turns out, even though they looked like the ideal couple, it was a very different story behind closed doors. E.B. mainly spent her days blowing all her husband's hard-earned money on alcohol and slot machines. Her son said that she had a vicious dark side when she drank, and she was drunk a lot. But as an alcoholic and a gambling addict, she spent more time at the slot machines than she did with her husband. They were basically living separate lives, almost never seeing each other in that big house. They even slept in separate rooms to avoid each other. This doesn't sound like the ideal marriage, does it? At the trial, everyone listened in shock as these secrets were revealed. Joseph still argued that he hadn't murdered his wife, but was actually trying to help her. But because he couldn't easily make a mistake like that, and because he made no attempt to save her when things went wrong, nobody really believed him. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days, and then, in February 2008, Joseph was convicted of manslaughter. In the judge's closing statement, she said he got lucky because what he did to E.B. looked a lot like a deliberate murder than manslaughter. At the age of 72, Joseph was sentenced to 7 years in prison. E.B. wasn't the only lottery winner who suffered a tragic fate. What would you do if you received a call that your healthy brother, who just won the lottery, had suddenly died from a heart attack? Do you accept it? Or does that seem kind of suspicious? That's exactly what happened to Imtiaz Khan, the brother of lottery winner Aruj Khan. Aruj was a family man with a wife and teenage daughter. He owned and managed his own dry cleaning business in the far north side of Chicago. It was the spring of 2012 when Aruj got his big break. He'd picked up a couple of scratch-off tickets while he was at the 7-Eleven near his home. The first one, as usual, earned him nothing. But Aruj couldn't believe what he saw as he scratched off his second ticket. He'd won $1 million. Let's face it, that's a life-changing sum of money, and it was a great day for Aruj. His family went with him to the winner's press conference. Aruj told everyone that he was going to donate some of his winnings to a children's hospital, and he was excited to see how his new wealth could help him grow his business. But he never got that far. Just a few weeks later, on the 20th of July 2012, Aruj's brother, Imtiaz, got a call. He was told Aruj was having a heart attack. He rushed over, but it still wasn't fast enough. By the time he arrived, his brother Aruj was dead at just 46 years old. Imtiaz knew immediately that his brother hadn't died from a heart attack. His death was simply too suspicious. After all, this happened so soon after his big win that he hadn't even collected his winnings yet. His winner's check had finally been issued just the day before he died. But knowing that your brother has been murdered is only one part of the problem. Getting the authorities to prove it is a lot harder. See, at the time, the coroner's office never performed full autopsies on anyone who was over the age of 45 at the time of their death. Aruj was 46 when he died, and because his body had no signs of trauma or a struggle, the police didn't think his death was suspicious, and they didn't order an autopsy. They did a basic toxicology blood test on Aruj, which checks for opiate drugs, alcohol, and carbon monoxide poisoning, which could have caused his death. But the tests came back negative. They decided Aruj had died due to natural causes, and the case was closed. But Imtiaz wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. He was so sure his brother had been murdered that he pleaded with the police to take a closer look. They were probably convinced that a death so close to a lottery win is kind of suspicious, so they did a few more tests. They used the blood sample from the test they'd done before, but this time, they checked for a few more dangerous substances. What they found was chilling. Imtiaz was right. His brother hadn't died of a heart attack. Aruj had been poisoned with cyanide. Cyanide poisoning isn't a very nice way to die. It disrupts your body's ability to transport oxygen, making you feel like you're suffocating and causing violent convulsions as your cells rapidly die. A high dose can kill you in just 5 minutes. Definitely not enough time to get to a hospital and get a diagnosis to be saved. It's a pretty violent way to go, but it's also incredibly rare. The coroner who tested Aruj said that this case was only the second cyanide poisoning he'd seen out of 4,500 patients. That's why they don't normally check for cyanide in blood tests. Thanks to Imtiaz insisting that they take a closer look, Arooj's case was reopened and a homicide investigation kicked off. The first step was for the police to get permission to dig up Arooj's body. Permission was granted, and Arooj's grave was dug up a week later. They needed to perform tests on his body, including checking for traces of the poison in Arooj's stomach. Of course, if Arooj's food was poisoned, that would mean his wife, who cooked his last meal, was the prime suspect. She cooperated with the police, saying that there was no way the food was poisoned because there were 3 of them eating it, including her and her father. The police couldn't prove her wrong. By that time, Arooj's body had decomposed so much that they couldn't determine how the poison got into his body. They only found a residue of cyanide in his stomach, which was strange after finding lethal doses of poison in his blood. In fact, the amount of poison they found was what convinced police that Arooj's death was definitely a murder. Police searched the house that Arooj shared with his family, but they found no trace of the cyanide that killed him. The investigation hit a dead end pretty fast. Meanwhile, the family was fighting over Arooj's lottery winnings. The court decided that money should be given to his closest family members. They awarded his daughter a few condos owned by Arooj and 1/3 of the lottery winnings, while his wife got the rest of the lottery money and the dry cleaning business. But had they just given Arooj's money to his own murderer? They still don't know. Police say they can't find a witness to help them continue their investigation because members of Arooj's extended family aren't being honest with them. They seem to think that there are people close to Arooj who know more than they're saying. Imtiaz agrees. He says Arooj's lottery win caused a lot of tension in the family, and he didn't exactly deny that one of them might have murdered him. Unfortunately, almost a decade later, nobody actually knows the truth. I guess the moral of the story is, be careful once you win the lottery. And of course, these 2 winners were surrounded by the wrong people, which I definitely hope is not your case when you hit it big. Do you like this video? Then you'll definitely want to check out this mini documentary we did on Jack Whitaker, the man who won $314 million and instantly regretted it.